I'm sorry in many ways that the English National Opera has finally agreed to go up to Manchester, but it's not doing so until 2029. So there's a little bit of time now. It's no longer that knee jerk departure which was envisaged under Nadine Dorries and looked like the complete collapse of the opera house entirely, and the idea of English national opera, the idea of opera being performed in English that is accessible. But I hope that if it goes, or when it goes north, the prices of seats are going to come down, the repertory will expand, that there will be even greater focus on developing local talent and the talent in the UK, because in many ways that's not going to be something that can be done in Covent Garden. Covent Garden is very much a receiving house for the great names, the great international names of opera. Whereas I remember when I was a very small boy going up to London, when I think the English National Opera had only just opened in the Coliseum, and I was far too small for it, but I saw the some of the Ring cycle, and I saw Rita Hunter, who seemed she seemed uh, she didn't have a very big voice, and she was quite tiny. And Alberto Remedios with Goodall's conducting of the Ring cycle. And I then got the records, and I'm afraid I did put them on 78 because I thought maybe they would go a little quicker. But I was very much enamored of the Ring cycle. I even got hold of the scores so that I could read through the text as I was listening to the records, and I thought I could restage it better, of course. But it made a big impact on me, and I think part of that was because it was sung in English, and I could sort of understand what was going on. Um, and it was my introduction to opera, and I didn't get another introduction to opera until I saw Aida in the baths of Caracalla outside, the most extraordinary production with elephants and dromedaries on stage, and a giant obelisk being lifted into the air, and chariots, of course, chariots and horses, and the most wonderful procession. And I think the whole point about opera is it's for the people. It's a popular entertainment, and it gives us, particularly Wagner, gives us the whole ammunition of film music through Wagner and his disciples, people like Korngold, who then became a composer for film music. We still have the idea of the leitmotif drumming out in adventure films, bomb, 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 ba-dum, bomb, ba-dum. And you don't even need to see Darth Vader to know that he's being referenced. He's being referenced through that thematic musical format developed by Wagner. And we have opera to thank for that. Opera gave us the vocabulary of the motion picture. And so I think it's very important. And as I say, it's a popular medium. You only have to go to Italy to see just how popular opera can be. And and I think sometimes with Covent Garden and with the price of tickets, opera has become this slightly erudite, slightly arty, slightly posh thing that you do at Glyndebourne with a bottle of champagne, lounging around on the lawn during the intervals, as if the most important thing is the interval. It might be if you're not enjoying the opera. But I think there's something wonderful about big opera. It's not something you can do on the cheap. And it's although there are touring opera companies, and I fear that taking E&O up north is going to seriously damage the reputation and the audience available to companies like Opera North, based in Leeds, Scottish Opera, and Opera Go Round, which does wonderful productions around Scotland and in the islands. I helped translate a production of the Grand Duchess of Gerolstein back in the day, and that was great fun. And and there was, and then there's Welsh National Opera, which is terribly important, and then of course Glyndebourne, particularly Glyndebourne touring. But you can do things when you're anchored to your own theatre that you can't do when you're touring. And for example, when Welsh National Opera tours, it often tours with a much smaller stage set than it would use to perform on at its home in Cardiff. And I think opera needs to encourage. It needs to teach. It not only needs to teach the skills, it needs to teach the audience. And maybe this move, if the move guarantees cheaper seat prices, then it's a good thing. If the seat prices gradually continue to get higher and higher, and it's then even more inaccessible, and I think it needs to built into the ENO schedule, there needs to be a tour down to London, and I'm afraid this is going to leave the Coliseum empty, and simply receiving second-rate revivals of musicals with perhaps lovely pit orchestra production, but nevertheless pretty ropey scenery, as in the revival of My Fair Lady. And we need something better for that theatre, because it's one of the great theatres of London. And I think it's too big. It's too big for a musical to take up permanent residence unless somebody's got some great ideas. There are some great musicals, but they require large companies, and I don't think the West End can now afford a company that is large enough to fit into ENO if it's not an operatic company. And all equally, with such a wonderful orchestra pit, it's a shame to reduce that down to something which is simply playing tracks with a bit of drumming. And we need that whole experience of live music, live singing, and the scope of the presentation. I was looking at the ring cycle, I think, of Opera North, and it's been reduced really to a concert performance, and that's not what opera is. And there were critics saying, well, it's you couldn't hear a better version of the ring cycle, even if you went to Bayreuth. Maybe true, but the point about opera is you don't hear it, you experience it, and it drenches all the senses. And sometimes we, because of the importance of the LP and of recorded opera, we tend to think of opera as being a sound experience. It's not just a sound experience, it's a visual experience, and it's a theatrical experience, an emotional experience as well. And that extraordinary soundscape and that extraordinary size of the show envelops the audience. I can remember, there's very few times I've been to an opera recently where the stage has been filled in a way that a 19th century operatic stage would be filled. But I remember a few times going to the Bolshoi in Moscow and being overwhelmed by the sheer number of people on stage. That's why it's called the Bolshoi, the big. And many of the people who were standing on stage were literally standing and doing nothing while the snow fell for about 20 minutes. And two or three singers belted out at the audience in Russian. And I was thinking, I don't quite know what's going on. But it did seem very overpowering and enveloping. And I was sitting there in my gold chair, feeling rather privileged, but trying to resist the urge to go to sleep.